Welcome to Cloud Dialogues. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Seriously. Do you want me to intro or do you want to intro?
It's fine. I'll do it. Okay, you go.
I'm
Okay,
happy to
go.
do
Go.
it
You can do it, Georgia.
because I think
Okay,
this was my
good.
idea,
Go.
wasn't it?
Anytime you're ready.
Wasn't it my
Yeah.
idea, I think?
We. Yeah, it's your
Yeah?
idea.
Okay. I was
It's
just,
her fault. It's her fault you're here, Alison,
well,
and my fault because I asked you.
what do you,
Claim the fame. Just take it is
okay.
what I suggest.
No, it's definitely my fault. Everything's my fault. I'm happy to take the blame. Um, Welcome to Cloud Dialogues, everyone. So, for this episode, we're super lucky to have Allison Howells with us. Allison has 20 plus years of experience with data and analytics. And one of the things that a lot of executives have been asking me about lately is I want to do XYZ with AI and I want to use obviously our data to do that. I want to do specialist things with AI. And my sort of first response to that is like, okay, what shape is your data in internally? Because that's kind of like the foundation, right? How do we build a solid foundation to actually enable us to do cool stuff with AI and machine learning? So I thought that this would be a good opportunity for us to, with Allison, which I'm super excited about. I think that's a problem that a lot of organizations are struggling with is how do we actually, it's fine for us to go and like POC a bunch of AI, capability, but unless we get our data foundation in order, it's really difficult to actually execute on that. So that's what I wanted to talk about today was how do we get from perhaps a situation where our data is very fragmented or we maybe don't have a good grasp of where all the useful data is and what sort of format is it in. How do we get to a point where we can actually have that solid foundation to enable us to go and do all those awesome things with AI?
Alison,
Good.
welcome to our little podcast. We've been going for a year now. You might have
Hey,
seen George's
1 year.
post.
Oh,
You probably haven't, but a
I did.
LinkedIn post.
Yeah. Congratulations. That's good.
Um,
No, it's fantastic.
do you want to give a bit of a quick summary about you to start off?
Yeah, cool. So, yeah, can I call myself the data OG? I don't know, like the original gangster, like 20 years of data.
I
Yes.
love that. I love that. You are though. You are though. Like you were data before data was like really,
Before data was a
cool.
thing. Yeah. I'll tell you how I got into data super quickly. I had no idea what data was, what IT was, what computer science was. I had no idea. But I fell into a degree that showed me that. But at the same time, I was working in a call center, actually, like an insurance call center. Didn't realize it, but I was a data producer at the time. And later on, I got to go into what was a BI team within that same organization. And all of a sudden, these light bulbs started to go off around, this is the stuff that I was capturing from customers and really now giving insight to the business across different functions and domains around what they could be doing from an action point of view. So that was my introduction to data, and I've just taken that thread into many different facets of data analytics and AI over the last sort of 20 odd years. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Cool. And you've worked for end customers and consulting. Is that you've done a bit of
Yeah, exactly. So I've actually spent a lot of time in industry. I did it all a bit asked about. Can we swear on
yeah,
this one? I
you
think
can
we
do
can. Yeah, I
slightly.
did. Most people go into consulting when they're a bit younger. I was a bit scared, to be honest, and I stayed within industry, but it served me really well. So I spent many years within FSI and insurance and banking in Australia and Singapore, always in data analytics and BI type teams, working with different parts of the organizations and really building this strong empathy for customers and products and service offerings that these organizations needed to offer, and how could data really help unlock insights and drive good actions and value. So spent a lot of time doing that, then had the absolute amazing pleasure of going to some innovation labs within Singapore. Got to, I call it mucking around, got to play around with data that was considered alternative data assets at the time, to think about new product and service offerings and how can we use data in different ways to help improve products for customers. So we were building things like alternative credit scores and doing things around natural language processing and computer vision to help turn things like insurance products that are quite reactive products into more proactive products for customers and the businesses. We had a great time doing that. And then I sort of took a different path and did a 180 and went to consulting, and have been building sort of data AI analytics teams to really help bring the right talent to customers and clients to really drive and figure out what should their data and or AI strategy be. Some people want to have an AI strategy without a data strategy. Well, I can tell you now, you can't do that. But, so data strategy is really got to be tied to business strategy. So that's where I have a great time talking to clients and customers about what are the problems they're trying to solve for. Forget about the technology for a little bit, but what's the problem we're trying to solve for here? And then how can we bring data and all the right technology to help enable that or drive that change? And then, so that sounds easy, but then it's like, what's the roadmap to get there? How do you figure out what are the right steps, and how do we show incremental value very early on? Because you can have a North Star that could take a couple of years to get to, but people get bored by then, people run out of money, they lose focus. So it's really important, in my view, to figure out how you're going to show that value very early on in that data journey. It's part of the culture that you need to embed as part of that program of work that you're doing. So I focus a lot around that space with the work that I've been doing recently with a lot of customers across SI, healthcare, retail, and a few others thrown in there. That's what I love to do.
Cool, very cool. So you've seen lots of different data platform environments through your travels. Have you seen a change over the past 10 years or so? I know, for example, 10 years ago, everyone was into Hadoop and big data, even though they might not have had big data. They were usually technology-led things. What sorts of data platforms have you seen over the years, and has it changed, and do you see some sort of pattern from where it started to where it's sort of heading in that respect, if you understand the question?
And that's a really great question. Absolutely, yes, there's been huge change. If I can say 10, 15 years is a long period of time. Before going into the what's changed, the biggest thing that I think has changed is the volume of data and the type of data and who's creating it from lots of different angles. And I don't just mean if you're a business and you have customers, but the three of us on this call, we're all data producers in different ways with the social media platforms that we use, different things that we do at the supermarket and how data is captured there, even with our own images being captured in video and that being analyzed by a retailer, for example. So all of those different things have shifted and changed and will continue to shift and change. And Jen and I will help do some of that as well. But taking that then to, so businesses and corporates and enterprises, to your point, Matt, the data's changed over time for different reasons as well. So, historically, like you said, lots of organizations, whether they had big data or not, they wanted a big data platform, a centralized data platform. They wanted to bring it all together. I guess at the time, I don't think there was anything wrong with that. It's hard though. It's really hard. I've been in an organization where we had 23 different data warehouses and they still haven't decommissioned them all, right? And this is like 7 years ago. So, and it's a journey. And you need to figure out where you're going to spend your time and where that return on investment is. Does it make sense to bring all your data together? And why? And by the time you do it, is that data still relevant?
Yeah, and you've got to keep it up to date and governed.
You've got to keep it up to date. That's right. And then the flip side of that is I think organizations are starting to realize that and say, actually, we just kind of need to still access the data, but we don't have to bring it all together. But with the advancements of what I consider modern data platforms and approaches to data strategy and principles, what are the principles your organization wants to embed? Things around data culture, data accessibility, data democratization, data governance, all of these things. What's important to your organization? And then therefore, how will that inform what kind of data platform you need to bring into your organization to help maximize data accessibility and therefore value that you're going to drive from the data that you've got there.
I think the most data warehouses I've seen is like 18.
Wow,
over
it's still a
20
lot.
is impressive.
Well, in
That's
one place.
impressive.
It's a lot.
Yeah, but I feel like it's definitely about finding a midpoint, right? Like as opposed to trying to centralize everything is just going to be impossible. I always think it's more about knowing where the right data is and being able to access it as opposed to actually having it all in the same place.
100%. And look, some organizations, like you said, have Hadoop and Teradata and some of this older, sort of more legacy data warehouses now. Some organizations are smaller in nature and they will use Excel as a data warehouse because of the nature of their business and how it's grown. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just being aware of what are the pros and cons and what's the size and what's the skill exactly.
Yeah.
And then you move into that, what's scalable and elastic in nature for the purpose of data storage, analytics, the skill sets of your team members that you're trying to retain, because you want them to be excited about the data and the tools and technology that they're going to use as part of their job. So there's a lot in all of that. And I don't ever think there's ever really a wrong answer, but it's more around what are the considerations and what's the right priority area for your organization at that point in time. So if you're trying to evolve use case X, which I don't know, it might be customer growth for your organization for whatever reason, then how are you going to use data to help you get there? And then therefore, what are those choices you need to make as part of your data team, your data warehouse, your data product service offering, etc.
I guess it's about the visibility.
The best sort of CDO type function that I've ever seen was people that were really good at dealing with people and they knew where the data was, as opposed to like, we're going to streamline everything, we use the same pipelines to run the data, or whatever you're trying to do, right? We're going to try and consolidate it into one warehouse, which would be just an absolute nightmare. Going from 23 even down to 5 is a significant change, right? But considering cost as an example, right? Like if you've got 20 plus data warehouses, in all likelihood you're running the same queries over and over and over again, when you could be doing that in a more centralized way. At the same time, you're probably never going to get everything all in the one place. That's probably not a realistic goal.
100%. I think you touched on something there about knowing the people and where data sits in the organization, tribal knowledge. So that tribal knowledge, technology can't really replace that. And that takes time and effort and building relationships and networks and trust with your colleagues, not necessarily from just the other technical teams, but the business domains and functions as well, and the subject matter experts from those areas. Like you said, Georgia, so you can understand where is all this data, what's its purpose, what's its intended purpose, what are we actually trying to use it for, does that even make sense? Because the context and that subject matter expertise from those domains is really, really important and crucial around that. And then once you sort of got that mud map, maybe it actually does make sense to have a more consolidated data view for a period of time, because you're building up this knowledge base. But then to increase things around data innovation, data democratization, and accessibility, then you might want to move back to a more decentralized approach, something more like a data mesh, where actually you might have some more center of excellences around some of the core things from a governance point of view, but you want the different data domains and subject matter experts to own and craft those data products. No wrong or right answer. It depends on the journey that the organization is on at that point in time. I do believe it does have to be both a top-down and bottom-up approach in terms of the people running the organization and the belief that this is the right thing to do from a culture point of view, because otherwise it won't work. You have to come at it from both angles.
Obviously there's people that are creating data and there's people that are consuming data, and we're all doing all of those things at any point in time. But whenever I talk to executives about changing their data landscape, the first thing I'm asking is, how are you actually using the data? Because how you're using it will drive the requirement for it, right? And I think a lot of organizations are guilty of not being particularly data driven in their day to day. And if you're not data driven in your day to day, you're not going to be driving the right requirements for the data, right? It's just going to be, oh, well, like we want this data here to use it for like a POC or whatever, but that's not really a long-term strategy. If we want to use data in the right way, we have to actually be using it in the day-to-day conversations
Or
that
we
we
might
have.
be,
Exactly.
or we might be using it. Like we might want this, we might want that, but do you actually need that? Like, what is it that you actually need? Like everyone thinks about the things that they could have rather than what they actually need for their business outcomes.
Yeah, I always like to challenge people, and coming back again to use cases. So if someone crafts a use case and I want data for this, okay, so if you get that data for that use case, what are you going to do with it? Tell me an action that you're going to take from it. If you can't tell me an action, you don't really need it.
They don't have an answer.
You don't have, or make them think about it. And this is really important, because this turns into that desirability, viability, feasibility of you going to the effort of enabling that use case to do X. But if you don't know what is that potential action that you believe is going to improve something or give you an insight that's going to do something better, what are you doing it for?
Yeah.
Maybe just because, and maybe just because is okay as well. Could be a risk thing, but like really dig deep. Ask your customers and your clients why. What do you want that data for? Because you might not actually need it.
Yeah, and that's a key thing for our listeners, right? Executives out there who are thinking about these sorts of things. Ask your business, ask your business stakeholders what they actually need to do their job, and map out the data flow, right? Map out the, what do you call it? The use cases and where the data is coming from. It's probably, a bit of work, but it's probably useful in the end, because then you can actually see on a page what's happening.
I think having the personas that are engaged in this type of workflow and having a really deep understanding of them is really important as well, and probably something that often gets overlooked. A lot of the time, like we say, these sort of things end up being like IT driven, which is not ideal, right? Because IT probably wants to do cool stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's useful.
Yeah, exactly. IT likes to play with tech and sometimes not talk to the business.
Of course, and that's understandable, right? Like there's a level of engagement that you want to drive, but at the same time, like having things that are actually going to be useful for the business. But I feel like it's going to need to be, it's always like driven by, when I talk to a lot of executives, it's quite apparent that they're not really using data in their day-to-day
Yeah.
conversations. And then it comes back to, well, if you're not currently using this sort of data for these conversations, how are you going to actually
Yeah.
drive the need for it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's got to be useful and relevant, I think. And so, coming back to an organization's business strategy and its objectives, why are you wanting to use data to support one of those objectives at a given point in time? I think if you can tie it to those types of things, then you've sort of, got 50% of the battle over. But then it's the additional piece is what action are they going to take from that? Because then, as a data team, you can figure out all the other different pieces of data that might also complement that potential insight. So, being able to articulate that and explore that is really, really important, because sometimes someone could ask for data for something without really knowing what they're going to do with it, and it can actually be distracting. It might, and it can diverge from an objective that someone's trying to achieve, as opposed to what it should be doing. So I just think it's important. Put the tech aside for a second. What's your business or customer or service problem that you're trying to solve for? And then, hypothetically, what would the action be that executive or someone who's asking for the data is going to take from it? What's the action? If they can't articulate an action, maybe pick a different use case.
That's right. You touched on decentralized data platforms. That's an industry thing at the moment, and it's becoming more of a thing. Can you lighten us a little bit on some benefits of that? Why decentralizing your data platform is a good idea?
I think so. The FSI sector is starting to adopt that more decentralized approach. And I think part of the reason is they've historically had these monolithic data architectures, and they're just not cost effective, not manageable. They can be silos and bottlenecks for the business side stakeholders that they're trying to service. And now, with the advancements of cloud and tech in general, you don't have to bring your data to your platform. So you don't have to have the storage and the analytics sitting together all of the time. So to be able to leverage what I call the modern data architecture, modern data platform to support that level of scalability without bringing everything together, I think they've tapped into that. And because you're putting data accessibility and democratization back into the hands of the business, and ownership and accountability, because they're now in charge of the data quality. They're now in charge, to a point, data product creation and giving that data back to other parts of the organization that would like to use it. And they also have a different level of accountability for things around data governance and data security. When you're responsible for these things, your mindset changes. Therefore, you've got a different culture. So all of a sudden, everyone in the organization has a level of accountability for data. Before that, it was probably just the data team, honestly. I mean, that's probably what everyone thought. So I think this is really important. And I think the banks and the insurers are really starting to understand that and have, moved ahead quite quickly.
Yeah, the centralized team don't care as much.
I feel like,
I think.
well, I mean, I feel like this is a similar concept to like moving to a product operating model, right? is that you put that ownership back to the businesses to actually, and it's the similar concept to like when we talk about FinOps. It's like, well, if you want to use these data products and spend this money, then you need to be able to explain what the business value is, right? And the business is always going to be best positioned to do that. It's not an IT function.
Yeah.
Exactly. And look, it's not the data, I'll call it data teams, but it's not the data teams or IT teams, don't want to look after all of the data of the organization. They love to, because there's a lot of kudos that goes with that. But when you have all of those different stakeholders from all of those different parts of the business tapping on your door constantly, because an analytics team work is never done. There will never be a day when they've got nothing to do. So that means you've always got someone knocking on that door, which means you're a required and sought after resource. But that gets tiring. And if you're having to switch context continuously as well, given the different business domains and data domains that people might be asking you to support them in, that's tiring as well. So why not give that accountability back to those domains that have crafted the data and understand the data, understand the context of why the data was created, understand the context of why the use cases are important for the business to get an insight from? Makes much more sense. What you do have to do, though, is give them the skill sets. Give them the uplift the data literacy, data understanding, data visualization, data engineering skill set to be able to look after the data the way a centralized data team would as well. That takes time.
And I feel like from a compliance perspective, it's much better as well, because the people that are actually generating the data, they understand what the compliance requirements are, right? Whether it's GDPR or what have you. Whereas the data team's probably more technically focused as opposed to making sure that all of those requirements
a bit
are going to
further
be
away
met.
from the business, I guess. And it's similar in the cloud native space, right? So having a decentralized teams looking after products, which Georgia mentioned, it gives them a sense of ownership and accountability for cost and features and business requirements, and making sure that it lives up to the business function. And data, decentralizing data has been a bit slower than the other cloud things, but it's catching up now, especially with LLMs and AI and all that sort of stuff. It makes decentralized data platforms super, super important. Do you agree with that?
I do 100%. And there's a lot in that, though. If people feel accountable and they also feel a bit more innovative, you have so many more people in your organization now wanting to drive thought leadership around their domains using data. So when it comes to things like large language models and Gen AI and the art of the possible around what anyone in the organization could do with data, it's not now just a ticket they have to raise and it goes to the innovation team or the R&D team or over to the analytics and AI team. It's actually something that they can take ownership of. That's amazing, right? So all of a sudden you have additional people in your organization that can help drive some new innovative ideas, data product innovation, and really spearhead that as a company. Often it's the people on the ground, on the tools, talking to the customers day to day that actually have the best ideas and thoughts around how an organization should change. So you've just opened that up, right? You need to have the right governance around that, don't get me wrong, when it comes to things around keeping data secure, having the right level of governance, making sure PI data is handled correctly. But that's where the Centre of Excellence or data teams really need to come into their own to support the rest of the organisation in making sure those policies are there, understood, and those different domains know how to run with that and take ownership of that as well.
And I feel like that takes you full circle as well, right? Because if you know where that data comes from, you understand it. And I see this time and time again, is people using data that they don't really understand. If you are really taking ownership of that data and you understand where it comes from and you understand the assumptions and all the inputs into that data, you're then empowered to actually speak to it. I spent a number of years at Amazon. I feel like it's done well there in that if you are going to use data, there is an expectation that you will have a detailed understanding of where that data comes from. And if you don't, it will get picked up quite quickly, right? I think a lot of organizations don't operate in that culture. I think having that culture is really important. If you're going to use this data, you need to really understand it.
Agree. I couldn't agree more on that. And that comes back to data quality as well, Georgia. I've been in organizations where if you're a new executive coming in and this is when I was in call center days and insurance, you had to go and your first 1 or 2 weeks in these organizations, you weren't having lunch with management. You were sitting with the call center staff, listening to the calls with them, understanding the questions that they're asking of
Love
the
that.
customer, understanding the data that's being collected, looking at the systems. These are all green screen dumb terminals, but looking at the systems of how the data is captured, because this is informing them about the context of the data points that they will in the future be analyzing as part of their own business operations. So absolutely critical. And to your point of coming back to understanding the data, I mean, I've just taken probably quite an extreme example, and I frankly wish everyone still did that. I don't know if they do, but I think it's really important to understand that, because it gives you this level of empathy for the data itself, which most people probably don't pause on. Why would you empathize with data? Because different people can input it differently. Different people can give you a different level of quality. There's so many things around it. So understand that the context of how it's captured will, and this, doing full circle and coming over to things like Gen AI, if you have garbage in, you're going to have garbage out. So your LLMs and your Gen AI use cases are going to be not useless, but near useless to a point, because the data, the inputs won't be relevant. They just won't make sense.
Yeah, it's like often I get given like high levels on data, and I'm like, can you give me the raw data? And I feel like a lot of the time
Summarized.
then people
Summaries
don't
of
want to give it,
summaries.
because then you look at the raw
Summaries
data
of
and you're like,
summaries.
I don't know about this. Like, what do
Yeah.
all these fields mean? Like, you have to have that deep understanding of it, right? If you don't, then you're potentially speaking about things that are not real, essentially.
Exactly right, 100%. Like if you give someone 2 data points, but there's another 8 that make up the series of 10, like
Yeah,
you hear a different story there, or you see a different story. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, that's why that cataloging
100%. Yeah,
cataloging
it's
it is important, so people can understand the context and don't hide. You can have summaries, but as long as you document, the key data points behind those summaries, so people can actually go back to raw data if required, is super important, especially with
Yeah,
LLMs
I
and
agree.
AI.
when I look at extracts and there's like 150 fields, and I'm like, why do these fields say this? And it's like, oh, that's, you can
You
ignore
can
that. And I'm
ignore
like,
that.
oh,
Yeah, I think
like,
you
really?
just made
Then we kind of know we've got a problem, right?
a really good point though. Like you're sort of circling around things around data governance and metadata management and data dictionaries. It doesn't matter what kind of data platform you have: centralized, decentralized, data mesh, data fabric, an old school data where data governance is key all of the time. But when we're starting to talk about decentralization, it's where does the accountability now sit in a different kind of way. So it's just really understanding that as an executive, well, how is this going to work from an organization point of view, and how does your operating model and those principles that you want to bring in as part of your data organization, how do they complement and work with each other? So they go hand in hand. I think the op model side of things is pretty important.
Yeah. Very true, very true.
Absolutely. I feel like that's the first thing that you end up talking about when you start talking about data strategy, is like, well, does your op model actually enable what you're trying to achieve, let alone the thing that you're trying to achieve actually being useful? I feel like this is a working backwards thing. I feel like the other thing about decentralized is that you have less of those single points of failure.
Can do.
Okay.
I say again, this
Essentially, hopefully.
well, I think there's 2 elements here. One is probably more of the technical side of things, but then the other side is the people side of things. So when I say the people side, again, coming back to culture, if you don't have people understanding how their role fits in this operating model that we're talking about now and their level of accountability, or they don't, human nature often wants to protect things. That can also mean protecting the data in their domain and not necessarily sharing everything with everyone, but sometimes they should. So, we have to pause and consider, how does that work when we're saying that business domain owns that data, you're the data product creator, crafter, so forth. You do need to make it interoperable and share it with other parts of the organization. Sounds good. Tick. How are they going to do that? Are they going to have the right culture to want to enable the rest of the organization to use that data set that they've been looking after? Are they going to continue to keep the data quality or improve the data quality? So there's a few the elements in that, is just all I'm trying to say. Don't just assume that because more people are accountable, it's going to uplift and mature all of a sudden.
I have actually like a good story on this. Once I had a team that was creating like almost like I don't want to say project tracking, but sort of like a project tracking mechanism for like a very specific function. And they asked for access, they asked IT for an access to an API, and they extracted all the data from the API. And basically, what they had been given access to was everyone's salaries in the whole organization. So the first thing they did was they were like, is this actually what I think it was? So they queried the CEO and it like popped up and they were like, oh my goodness. And I was like, oh
You know
wow.
what? We need
It's definitely a
I think we
failure.
maybe we need a whole episode on data security. That's another one that we, because we've run out of time,
Data
unfortunately,
security. Yeah,
and
and
governance.
governance,
Yeah,
right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes it can go
yeah.
very wrong. Yeah, that's probably the worst. That's probably the biggest kind of fortunately that person raised the alarm immediate. They were like, I think I've got that was back in the days when we still worked in the office all the time. So everyone was sat near each other. It
Hello,
was like,
help!
I think I've got a problem. Yes.
Instead of it being hidden
Yeah,
in a
that's a
backlog that
bad
no one
one.
read. Um, Before we finish
Okay.
off, do you have a couple of key action items for an executive? You know, what they should do if they've got these great plans for some, great AI thing to help their business. What sorts of checks should they get their teams to do on their data side? You know, two or three top things that they should check as a takeaway.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So yeah, I think so. Your point about the use case, like what's the AI? It could be AI use case, but yeah, what just articulate that use case really crisply, succinctly. Understand
Or
what's it
yeah.
for, what's the business value or customer or service, what's the problem you're trying to solve for that use case. I mentioned desirability, viability, feasibility earlier. It's a bit of a framework you can apply to then. Well, how is this use case? Is it ethical? Is data available? Is it going to be a good ROI? Like you can apply a series of questions on top of it, depending on your domain and industry. But dig a little bit deeper there, because then you're really going to understand, out of all those use cases that you'd really love to prioritize, how do we start to prioritize those against those criteria, but then also like against your business strategy. Like you might say, oh, I need a report to tell me this, but why does that make sense if that has nothing to do with any of the business use cases that you're trying to enable? Data strategy and therefore data platforms should really be tied back to what's the business and organization trying to achieve more broadly, and then figure out what is that incremental roadmap, but always look for early value, minimal lovable
Yeah,
product early on is my suggestion. And not everything's going to work, not every use case should work, and that's okay, but you do want to create early buy-in and early adoption as well, and learn from that. The learning is just as important as the successes. Like from a failure point of view, you shouldn't aim to fail all the time, that's not what I'm saying, but you should also pause around when you do fail on a use case. Well, why did that not work, or why did we not get the right value from that? Because that should inform the other use cases that you're trying to enable as part of your platform more broadly. And then skills in the team. Like, have you got the right skills in your organization? How are you going to mature that over time? Because that's really important from a success point of view.
And I feel like that's one that it's like very largely dependent. Like when I think about like a lot of public sector organizations, for example, I probably see less of a need to really use data and AI, like just on your general day to day, right? Whereas when I think about like banking and what was the other one that you mentioned,
insurance.
Alison? You said banking and
Insurance,
yeah,
retail.
insurance
Yeah,
obviously are
retail
like
especially.
really, yeah, like really data heavy type
Yeah,
industries, right? I see a lot more of a need to have like a really distinguished data capability in those types of organizations as opposed to, but I guess as time goes on, regardless of what you do, if you are a larger organization, whether you're public sector, private sector, whatever, there probably will be more of a need to increase that capability, right?
100%. 100. And look, a really interesting industry or sector is healthcare. I've done a little bit of
Yes.
digital transformation with a healthcare provider before, and this was not that long ago. I had this light bulb moment when they said to me, Alison, a data breach for us is if a truck rolls over on the freeway and all of your personal health records get blown off onto the freeway. And I was like, huh? And then
Yes.
because it's not all digitized yet, it is
Yeah,
very much a paper-based
Yes.
activity.
Yes.
And then I paused on that. I'm like,
Wow.
wow, that's so true. Because, we're talking about Gen AI. We're thinking everything's, I'm just digital and we're at this other end of the scale. But actually, there's so many things from a data point of view that actually haven't been digitized yet or haven't been brought together or so forth. So, I think we just have to make sure we're not forgetting some of those
Yes,
things sometimes.
absolutely true. We better wrap it up there so Georgia doesn't have too much editing to do. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your time, your insights on data. We've wanted to do data for a while. We've finally done it, but I think we've opened up a few more topics that we can probably cover. We like more topics because, they're top of mind.
I feel like we just add more to the list. People say to me, like, how do you have enough stuff to talk about? I'm like,
That's
it's
right.
endless. Like, I feel like we could do way more than we do.
Yeah.
We're just so busy.
Yeah,
Like,
we could pump out a few more shows, but hey, it's about quality, not quantity, isn't it? Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, Georgia and Matt. It's been an absolute pleasure.
no,
And
thank
to our
you.
listeners, thank
That
you.
was
Please like
awesome.
and subscribe as per usual. And I like saying that, like and subscribe. And feedback. Yeah, and
We'll
see you
see you
next
next
time.
time.
And feedback, please. That'd be great. Thank you. Bye, everyone.